Hello, and welcome to the Critical Path Institute podcast. Our goal for this podcast is to connect the dots among our core competencies in regulatory science, biomarkers, data management and standards, clinical outcome assessments, and modeling and analytics, and how we accelerate drug development. CPATH created this podcast for researchers, clinicians, and industry and regulatory professionals with the hope that these conversations and the resources we share will advance your efforts and partnerships to improve global health.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the CPATH podcast, where we connect the dots between science, clinical medicine, drug development, regulatory innovation, but also, importantly, the patient's voice in this journey. Today, I have a treat for everyone. I have a really special guest. I'm going to call you the unsinkable Ron Bartek. Ron Bartek is a long-time example of leadership and patient advocacy, but he also has many more accolades in his career. Ron, welcome to the podcast. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Klaus. So it's Ron Bartek here. I am president and co-founder of the Friedreich Ataxia Research Alliance, or FARA, that my wife Rachel and I established together about 28 years ago when upon the diagnosis of our then 11-year-old son Keith with FA, as I will call it henceforth. And we looked around online and found very little research going on. We had to learn how to spell Friedreich ataxia, and we saw that there was no treatment approved for the condition, very little research going on, no drug companies interested, no organization devoted entirely to supporting that research. So it was a lot of big zeros in that space. And it took us less than a year to decide we needed to change those zeros to what we like to call in baseball crooked numbers. We wanted to get crooked numbers on the board in all those categories. And so we established FARA a year after our son was diagnosed. So it had been 1998. And we did that on the basis of 7 other parents like ourselves, 1 adult patient, and 3 of the world's leading scientists in this condition. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, great. No, thank you, Ron.
Expand a little bit later.
Yes, no, we're gonna keep the conversation going. But as you can see, Ron sees that firsthand. The need that there is in accelerating drug development for some really challenging and life-altering conditions. And Ron has been an example, as I was saying in the beginning, of leading through collaboration. Our interaction with FARA began many years ago when another great individual, Jane Larkindale, was working at CPATH. And it has proven
with whom
to
I
be...
had dinner last night.
Oh, great. So we have this long-standing collaboration, and it has evolved. But it has evolved from maximizing the power of the data that you were instrumental in setting up, but it also turned to be a pivotal moment for the leveraging of the data for a transformative regulatory development for Friedreich's ataxia. And then you joined our board. So Then that's the sequence of events. So I'd like you to reflect on each one of those parts and how you see your role at CPATH now that you've joined our board.
Thank you very much, Klaus. And I'd like to tell that story from its birth. Its birth was really, I think, profoundly interesting to me and probably to other rare diseases especially. But when we first got started at FARA, there was no data. There was precious little research, and we decided at the first international scientific conference on Friedreich's ataxia that we organized and co-hosted at the NIH with the Neurological Institute there. We were able to identify 65 scientists from around the world to join the 15 there at the NIH that knew something about Friedreich's ataxia. And we spent 2.5 days with that group. And we learned quickly that they didn't know each other. They, when each of them would give a presentation, the response was usually, "Wow, you're doing great work. I'd love to talk." And that was, and I've been reading your papers for 3 years. That was good news, but it was also an alarm. We didn't want them reading each other's papers. We wanted them on each other's papers. And so that's the kind of collaborative approach we began to foster when we started giving grants. And we quickly decided what we really needed to do was have that first clinical trial. There hadn't even been a clinical trial in our disease. So we went to the NIH and said, okay, we need to start a clinical trial. Whoa. You can't start a clinical trial until you have clinical outcome measures, until you have endpoints. And so we said, well, let's assemble 10 of our best basic and clinical scientists right there at the NIH and have that conversation. How can we develop a clinical outcome measure? This becomes a rock bed, a foundation for all the work that we've done in our natural history data, because we assembled 10 clinicians, our very best, from around the world, at the NIH, spent a full day with 14 patients that my wife and I were able to assemble from our catchment area around Washington, D.C. And they spent a full day at the NIH with these 10 clinicians examining each of the 14 patients one at a time against some standard neurological exams and some 3 metrics like 25-foot timed walk, pa-ta-ta test, a voice test, a vision test, and a 9-hole pegboard test. Well, that combination of a basic neurological exam, finger to finger, finger to nose, finger, and some upright stability metrics, all those were measured by each of the 10 clinicians with each of the 14 patients. And we assembled the same patients and the same 10 clinicians 18 months later without intervention because we didn't have any. And they did exactly the same exams with the same patients. And the points of data that were assembled were then compared with those 18 months earlier. And you saw what had changed without intervention across those 18 months. And that became the root of the Friedreich's ataxia rating scale, which is still our primary endpoint in almost all of our clinical trials. And then later was modified by the FDA when they said, okay, this is a great endpoint, great clinical outcome measure, but you're losing some you're confounding some important data because the lower extremities are not responsive pretty early on. So why don't you modify the Friedreich's ataxia rating scale by eliminating some of those metrics? That became the modified Friedreich's ataxia rating scale, which is the primary endpoint. And then to really cut to the chase, so we had set out to do a clinical outcome measure. The magic, the secret sauce here is that then we assigned first 5 clinicians. Now it's up to about 30 clinicians worldwide that are seeing as many patients as they can get to come to their clinic and using exactly the same examinations as added to over time when we come up with a different metric, a different examination or electronic examination, a different biomarker, for example. And so that became when we bought a couple of big servers and put them at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and started paying for their maintenance. And the first 5 and now 30 clinicians around the world doing those same exams, entering their data electronically against the templates that we developed using college students who were, really into, software science, and monitored by the wonderful group at the University of Rochester, who and Ross Perot's old firm, and assembling all those data on a really cool backbone, and that so that kept growing. And about 6 months into that, all these clinicians entering these data against these templates, the people that, like our best clinicians who knew what they were doing and knew what they were seeing, saying, wow, this is going to be a great clinical outcome measure, but guess what? It's also going to be the foundation of our natural history study. And so we continued to do with those 5 clinicians and now 30, entering data from the same exams as expanded appropriately. And now that's all going into a huge database at the University of Rochester. They're helping analyze those data. And that's become our natural history study. So, and the magic sauce is that our natural history data are identical to our clinical outcome measure data. And so it sets up the culminating part of the story that I know we're going to talk about. So.
Yes, thank you, Ron, because you then approached us to make sure that the power of the data that you had already set up to collect prospectively could be maximized.
Right.
And so we put in the data into the data analytics platform that we have, and we've been able to augment that not just with additional data in the disease, but also interconnect the data with data from other conditions, but make sure that the data integration process is set up in a way that the data can support regulatory submissions. And that was another piece of the secret sauce that CPAP brought to the equation.
Yes, exactly right.
Go ahead.
And that combination of those sauces has created a wonderful, it's not the end of the story, but it's certainly a great beginning of the story, because the power of that platform was such that, when we didn't have to go into a pre-IND meeting or a post-phase 1 meeting or a type C meeting and tell the FDA about our clinical outcome measure and our natural history database, because it was on their platform. This isn't, as you well know better than I, this is an FDA-funded platform. And so it wasn't even though that they knew about our database. And then when we sat down at the table with them, as we did a good number of times, including with omavaloxolone that became our first approval. The head of the Office of Neuroscience could say, this is the largest database on Friedreich ataxia in the world, and it's and here's what we're learning from it. Because in the meantime, of course, we were having listening sessions with the Office of Neuroscience and their best biostatisticians with our best biostatistician. And so they were becoming very familiar with our natural history database and growing in their belief that it was reliable natural history data. And then when it came time to make full use of the platform, so it wasn't just that we're on the platform and it was made available to our industry partners.
And that's the CPAP platform.
That's the CPAP platform, RDC ADAP.
Yeah, there you go.
Rare Disease Cures Accelerated Data and Analytics Platform. Not only is that made available to our industry partners, but that wasn't as important as it being in front of the FDA that entire time, because the industry sponsors could actually get those same data from us. We still have our own database, but the FDA doesn't sit down with our database,
right.
But they do sit down with the RDCA DAP, and they would invite us and Jane Larkindale and our staff to listening sessions with the Office of Neuroscience, and have conversations about each of those data points. And so that over time, and we'll cut to the wonderful beginning of the story here, is that when we got the review of when we submitted the application with Reata, the company that was developing omavaloxolone for that drug, it was given fast track treatment. It was given rolling review and or rolling submission. We submitted those data at the end of March 2022, and the review could begin. Well, midpoint that summer, we were told that, okay, these are very interesting data points, but we're probably going to need more. We even had a Type C meeting in which they said we're probably going to need to do another registration study to confirm these interesting but not sufficiently persuasive data. And we pushed back, and we said with the company, we think these data are sufficiently compelling and persuasive. We submitted a call to action that had 73,000 signatures from our families, from our best clinicians and basic scientists, and all of them saying the same thing. The families were saying, we want our children on this drug. The clinicians saying, we know these patients, we know this drug, we know the data from the clinical trial, we're the ones that did it. We want to be able to prescribe this medication.
And we provided the neutral ground, without any bias for the FDA to be able to then support the notion of the external control exercise, which is fantastic.
And so that summer, the company came to us and said, we think we can use this wonderful natural history data and some mechanistic correlation data that your papers have demonstrated. And let's do an analysis comparing, as an external comparator, all those natural history data with a closely matched cohort of 136 patients in the open label extension versus 136 patients, very propensity matched patients, same gender, same metric, same
baseline characteristics,
characteristics and so forth, and the same characteristics in their endpoints, and do that analysis, submit that comparison, and what that comparison showed, again, carefully matched cohort of 136 patients on nothing, compared to 136 patients on omavaloxolone for 3 years. What it showed was a 55% slowing of progression across those 3 years compared to the external control of the natural history data. Now, had that natural history data not been on the RDCA DAP, not been combed over with great precision by the FDA reviewers and their biostatisticians, it probably would have come to naught. But because of that, I'll never forget the call that Reata got from the Office of Neuroscience. It would have been in October of that year, 2022. And they said, these are very compelling data. And we're not finished with the review, but we're going to treat it very seriously. It's going to take us another 3 months to review all these compelling data. And so we're going to move your PDUFA date, the date on which they were by regulation required to give us a decision, going to move your PDUFA date from November 28th, 2022 to, it's going to make me cry, February 28th, 2023. I knew when we got that call that was Rare Disease Day 2023. We knew this division very well. We've been working with them for 15 years and a great deal of mutual trust and I would say even affection, but mostly, trust that we were doing it right. And I'll never forget saying to myself and others, there's no way these wonderful people would say no to us on Rare Disease Day. Because the other thing he said, we no longer feel the need for an advisory committee meeting. We no longer feel the need to assemble these outside experts. We've got your data. And so, sure enough, on Rare Disease Day of 2023, the FDA announced our first approval for Friedreich ataxia. And, so...
Yeah, that's the watershed moment for everyone. So as you can see, this is a very special episode because it shows what our data platform at CPATH, which is funded by the FDA, can actually do.
Right.
Through our neutral convening power, through our core competency in everything data, our core competency in everything advanced analytics, our core competency in regulatory science. How many times?
Could I just interject there that you don't have to listen to Klaus and me and broadcasting this. You can listen to the wonderful woman, Patrizia Cavazzoni, who was at the time the director of CDER, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. She said it to us personally. She said it to in public fora several times that it was the natural history database of FARA that was determined to be of regulatory grade that permitted them to make a positive decision to provide the very first approved treatment for Friedreich's ataxia. So it was that was her. And she wasn't speaking just for herself. She was speaking for the FDA, speaking for those reviewers who found our natural history database to be of regulatory grade.
Yes.
And there's the challenge. I'll just say too.
Bring it on.
What we want to do is, not hide this bright light under a bushel basket. We want to spread this capability to all the other disease groups. And I think CPATH is exquisitely well placed to help. And we've already gotten a whole lot of calls from big organizations that are now, becoming part of the platform. That, wow, great work. I've been working with them for years too, know their disease pretty well. They said, we're going to need to do it that way. So help us. Contact CPATH and help us. So the model's there. We need to spread that model. We need to get a whole lot more rare diseases and even common diseases on the platform so that two things would happen. One, because you're so well regulated in terms of standardizing the data formats and making sure they are high quality, that gets the input to high grade quality. If it's not high grade quality, it doesn't get on the platform. And so the next step is we need to train, especially the newer groups that really don't know what regulatory grade natural history data look like. We need to work with all the disease groups. I could see CPATH, and you asked me to say something about what we can do together now that I'm on the board. I think we need to have a program, Klaus, in which we collaborate not just with the FDA as we always do, but with all the big umbrella disease groups like NORD, and as we have from the beginning, and Every Life and Genetic Alliance and Global Genes, and let's get all of their efforts towards natural history to be trained. Let's train all these, especially the new groups, the members of those umbrella groups, to train them with the FDA at our side, training them in large groups. This is what regulatory grade natural history data look like, and here's how to collect it. And so that's going to be my fiery mission.
Ron, let's do it. Let's make it happen. And with you on the board right now, I think we can, because this is not just about, as you can see, this is not just a one-off with Friedreich's ataxia. This is a change in paradigm that everyone can benefit from.
And I'll complement that and by saying I've been working for several years with Amy Marcus of the Wall Street Journal. She was following our story for several years, and I contacted her about 6 months before getting the approval, saying, I think there's something cool coming. And because she'd been following us for a number of years, she said, well, help me understand. She said, I could never do a story on a single breakthrough for a single rare disease unless it has far broader implications for the rare disease community. Convince me that if you get this approval, it will be in that category of much broader application. And so I set up phone calls. She'd been hearing it from me for years, but I set up phone calls with executive directors or CEOs of some of the big umbrella groups and some regulatory specialists, and eventually wrote sort of a background paper for her. And so, sure enough, on Rare Disease Day of 2023, when I got the call from the drug company that they've just approved the drug. I was at Rare Disease Day at the NIH, and the Joni Rutter, the NCATS director, was moderating that whole day. She knew that there's a possibility. I've been working with her I've served on her council, and so anyway, she knew that there was a possibility of that. She kept texting me, any news yet? Any news yet? No, Joni, no news yet. And that she was at the podium closing Rare Disease Day, and thanking everybody. When I got in the call in the lobby, I walked down the aisle and raised my arms in the touchdown salute and signal. And she saw that, and on mic she said, Ron, do you have any news for us?
Oh, that's magic.
So one of her staff people brought me a mic, and I announced that we'd just gotten the first approval.
So here's another challenge slash opportunity. Now that you're on our board, we can work with Amy to also share some of the other stories and paradigms that we've changed in type 1 diabetes, type 1 diabetes prevention, Alzheimer's disease, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, tuberculosis, etc.
And I've had great talks with my dear friend Pat Furlong, that Alex mentioned earlier. And she's wonderful, as you know, and I work very closely with the MDA. And all these people are working together on all this stuff. And so it's very clear to each of us. I mean, as Pat put it to me, we've been working on this since the beginning of time, right? But there are these newer groups that haven't been and don't have that experience. So we need to not hide CPAS's bright light under a bushel basket. We need to have social media campaigns. We need to work with all these umbrella groups. And so we spread the wealth and we get these people trained up so they're not in the dark. Oh, they won't need to think, all I need to do is collect some patient-reported outcomes and that'll serve. Come on, let's train them on what regulatory grade natural history data look like and how to collect it and why it's so important.
Yes, and we maximize the call to action to make sure that the patient's voice can be heard. Ron, we're at time.
Okay.
This has been fantastic. I enjoyed this tremendously. We connected a lot of dots. So
Yeah.
I will thank you for joining us, helping us connect so many dots. I look forward to continue to work with you
There's
on our
still
board.
a lot of dots out
Oh
there
my
we
gosh,
need to connect.
yes. So we'll connect. We will keep connecting them. But for now, thank you so much, and thanks to the audience. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Did you enjoy this episode? Share it with a friend or colleague, or leave a review on iTunes, and help others discover and support our mission. We are welcoming guests with a range of experiences and viewpoints. The views expressed belong to the guests themselves. Learn more about Critical Path Institute at cpath.org. That's c-path.org. Stay tuned for our next episode coming soon, and thanks for listening.